Thank you so much for being with us today. We're really excited about our presentation. First, I'd like to introduce myself and my team. My name is Katie O'Brien, and I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing here at the Admiral of the Lake. I also have with us today, not necessarily in the room because they're doing different parts of the event, but I have Molly Kuhn, our residency sales counselor, Denise House, who's with us today, our sales and marketing assistant, and also Eli Harvey, our marketing manager. And I want to thank them for putting together such a great event. So, and there's Eli. To outline our schedule, we plan to keep the presentation to about an hour, and then we'll wrap up around 4 p.m., and then we'll continue on with more refreshments as well as tours throughout the community. A few housekeeping items. There are bathrooms right out through here, through the hallway. Valet parking. If you're staying past the event, if you could please collect your car by 5:30 p.m. And if you take this moment to turn off your cell phones, if you haven't already done so, we would appreciate it. I'd like to provide a little bit of an introduction to the Admiral of the Lake. There's a number of people who I think that this is their first time visiting the Admiral of the Lake. So we are a CCRC, or a continuing care retirement community, specifically a nonprofit Lifecare community. Our mission goes back 160 years, and I had one of the questions I had is, how old is this building? So our not-for-profit is 160 years old. This building is around 12 years old, but it sits in the footprint of a previous building that was the Admiral of the Lake, and it just was a board decision to rebuild, and that was about 12 years ago that we completed the project and started occupancy of the new building. We offer the full continuum of care, including independent living, assisted living, memory care, and skilled nursing, and also short-term rehab. We have 196 independent living suites, apartments, and in our harbors, or our higher levels of care, we have 39 assisted living suites, 17 memory support suites, and 36 skilled nursing suites. We're here today to talk about independent living and life care. But if you have family or friends interested in learning more about direct admissions for an assisted living or memory support apartment here at the Admiral of the Lake, please talk with me or one of my team members following the program. 3 things that I think really make the Admiral of the Lake special. First is life care, and we're going to hear all about life care. That's what we're here to learn about today. And it ensures future care is secured across the full continuum. It's good financial planning. The life care rate and higher level of care is at a predictable cost. And it's guaranteed for life. Our place here in Chicago on the shores of Lake Michigan, with the beautiful lake apartments looking out of the lake and the city, it's really unique to be here at the Admiral of the Lake, city and lake. It's just wonderful. I think Chicago is one of the best cities in the world. But most importantly, third, it's the people. Smart, engaging, and welcoming. It's truly the people that make the Admiral of the Lake special. Be sure to connect with one of our residents during your visit today. Next, I'd like to introduce Brad Breeding. Throughout my career in senior living and senior housing, a key source of information and education has been Brad and the invaluable resources provided by his company. His book, What's the Deal with Retirement Communities, along with mylifesite.net and their insightful blogs, guides, and booklets have played a crucial role in my professional development. Additionally, the presentations at conferences have been foundational in deepening my understanding of lifetime communities and the benefits for individuals. I'm truly grateful, Brad. So his bio includes the following. Brad began his career as a personal financial advisor. He spent 12 years perfecting his skills and earning the prestigious Certified Financial Planner designation. During this time, he noticed that older adults and their families needed help making financially significant decisions regarding senior living. This realization led him to create mylifesite.net, which I find is a very valuable web-based platform that provides families with tools and content to make informed retirement living choices. The platform focuses on CCRC life plan retirement communities and other senior living options. A number of people I spoke to as we got ready were talking about they're just starting some of their research, so this is a great place to start with Brad's presentation. Brad has been recognized for his expertise by reputable outlets such as Money Magazine, Kiplinger's, Wall Street Journal's Market Watch, USA Today, and the New York Times. He is a much sought after presenter, teaches at esteemed institutions like Duke University and NC State University, which underscores Brad's commitment to enhancing understanding and empowering informed decisions about senior living. Please join me in welcoming Brad to the podium.
Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon. I'm going to move this out of the way and stand right here. It's great to be with all of you. Good crowd. Thank you all for coming out. I guess you can already tell I'm not from this area, right? It doesn't take long to notice that. I'm from North Carolina. But I got here this morning from Las Vegas at a conference, and then I'm flying back to North Carolina tonight. So anyhow, this is a good little break along the way. So we've got a lot that I want to try to cover with you all today. This is a topic I could probably talk about for hours, but I'm not going to do that to you, I promise. But, you know, as Katie mentioned, I know some of you maybe are just now starting to think about this decision, and if it's right for you. Others of you, maybe you've done a lot of research already, and you're a little closer to making that decision. So my goal today is that no matter where you are in that process, hopefully I can give you some information that when you leave here, you'll have a little better idea of what your best path forward is, because that path is going to be different for everybody. And of course, that's the reason for the title, Finding Your Path to Your Most Secure Future. I'm not drinking milk, by the way. This is water. We don't have them like this in North Carolina. I thought she was handing me milk at first. Anyway, so let's go ahead and jump in. Turn this on. There we go. So I want to start with kind of the different steps of the decision process. And then with the presentation today, I'm going to kind of focus a little bit on each of those steps along the way. So the first thing, as you're thinking about planning and you're thinking about where to live and all that goes into that, the first thing that I recommend, and I'll read this out if you can't see that from the back, but it says your what and your why. What I mean by that is what's really important to you. As you sit here today and you think about everything in your life, your future, what is really important to you? And not only that, but why? Why is it important to you? Because when we think about why, it forces us to dig a little bit deeper into that, right? And we may think, that's not as important as I thought it was, or vice versa. So understanding your why you're here today, is a very important, I think, starting place to everything that we're talking about. Next, understanding the options. There are so many different types of choices when it comes to retirement communities, senior living, whatever we want to call it. So many different choices, and I find that's half the battle, is really just understanding what those options are and the nuances and the difference between one versus the other. And so we'll spend some time today going through that. Next, doing your research. The next step, after you've gone through these first two, here. This is our focus. Here. As I was saying, the next step, after you've done these two things, understand what the options are, then you're going to pair those together. What's important to you and why? What are the different options that are out there? And where's the match between them? And that means doing your research, digging in, asking the questions. And you all are doing that today. You're being here and gathering information. And I commend you for that. The next step, finding the right financial fit. Whether it's the Admiral at the lake or some other option, does it make good financial sense for you? Now, I'm not here today to give you a presentation on that. Everybody's in a different situation. You may have an advisor you work with, you may not. There's tools, that the Admiral has at their disposal that you can use as well. So there's lots of different things, but that's a big part of it, obviously. Does it make good financial sense for you? And then once you've gone through all of this, hopefully it leaves you in a place where you feel confident in the decision you're going to make. Where you feel that you have the information, your questions are answered, and now you feel empowered to make a confident decision. And you should be able to make this decision confidently, because it's a big decision. There's one other one, making the move. Actually making the move, right? So, you could reverse those last two, because sometimes we have to come to grips with making the move before we can actually decide that we're going to do this, right? That's a big deal to some people. Making the move. We wrote an article a few years ago that's called Why You Should Move Every 10 Years. Because it gets you used to it, and you kind of purge stuff each time. But when you've been in the same house for 50 or 60 years, things have accumulated, it's a big deal. There's lots of resources available to help you all with that as well. So you're not on your own with that piece. But this is sort of the broad stroke around that decision process. So let's talk about some of these things, starting with the first one. Your what and your why. Here are some things that you can think about, okay, as you are going through this in your mind. Number one, where and how do you find purpose each day? Where and how do you find purpose each day? You all may already know this. Purpose in life is extremely important to our overall health at any age. In fact, there was a study done last year, and I know you can't see all this, and by the way, I'm going to make these slides available to Katie. So if you all want a copy of what I'm going through, let her know and she can give it to you. But they did a study, McKinsey Health Institute last year surveyed 21,000 older adults across 21 countries, and they looked at all the different things that contribute to good health. 57, I think, different factors they looked at. 53, maybe. Anyway, the very number one, the top answer was purpose in life for older adults. That was the number one contributor to overall good health. So asking yourself, how will I find or maintain or rediscover purpose is really important. This is a good time to think about that too. For those that are thinking about moving to a community like the Admiral, it might be an opportunity, sort of that new chapter, try new things, meet new people, rediscover, what have you. And you'll see, actually, again, I'll read these out, but some of the other top ones up here, opportunities to learn new skills. That's right here. Volunteer when able, meaningful connection with friends, on and on and on. Incredibly important to our health, and I'll talk more about that actually in a little bit. What concerns do you have about the future? When you think about the future, your situation, everything that goes into that, what are the concerns that come to mind? And that kind of leads to the next one, which is, what does peace of mind look like for you at this point in your life? If you were to close your eyes this afternoon or this evening and think, what does peace of mind really look like to me? What does it make, when I think about the future, what does peace of mind look like? What do I want to see? What do I not want to see when I think about that? And then lastly, you want to think about, obviously, the things that are particular to your situation, your circumstances, your needs. Could be a little bit different for all of you, and that, of course, will be an important part of this process as well. So these are just a few things to kind of get you started thinking that. Now, when we talk about concerns, things to plan for and think about, I'm going to go through some of the top ones that are out there among other older adults. These are things that either you see in surveys or research that's done, but these are pretty much the top concerns. The very first one that you tend to see is serious health problems. And that's not a big surprise, right? That's one of the top concerns. And it's not even just the concern about health or health problems, but then you have the cost that's associated with it. So there's a lot of stress that comes, of course, with that one. Not being a burden on family. That sort of ties into the first one in some ways, because that's part of that scenario potentially.
That's okay.
But this is a big one too. Not being a burden on family members. My mom feels that way. I'm so grateful. I'm the adult child. My mom's kind of going through some of these things just like you all are, and she doesn't want to be a burden on me and my brother, and I'm grateful for that. Not that I wouldn't do anything for her, because I would, but she doesn't want that for me, and I am grateful for that. And besides, who knows what damage I would cause if I was in charge. Running out of money to live comfortably. I talked earlier about the financial piece of this decision. I have often found that many people that I would describe as quite wealthy still have this concern. Because, frankly, you get there by making good financial decisions and being careful, right? So a lot of times, that's still a concern I've found even among, as I said, people that I would consider quite wealthy. Losing independence. This is a big one that I see a lot. I don't want to lose my independence. And you hear that a lot, actually. If you look at it, most people say they want to stay in their own homes, right? You hear that. I mean, that's no big surprise. People say they want to stay in their own home. But when you look at that survey, those questions, what it usually says is, as long as possible. And I think that's an interesting thing because we need to think about what does independence really mean to us. I mean, some people just by virtue of physically living in their own house consider that independence. When in reality, that situation may not be a very independent situation for some people. In fact, it may be a very dependent situation. So what does independence really mean? What does that look like for you? I think that's important to consider. Lack of social connectedness is a big one. You're seeing this more and more and more now in research that's being done. It's particularly as it relates to the aging population in our society. Social connectedness, it really ties into lack of purpose in many ways. These two, I would say, are very closely connected. Because what happens is when you have a lack of social connectedness, that then leads to a sense of loneliness. Those two things are different, by the way. Social isolation is the condition. Loneliness is the feeling. And then when that comes in, then it can start to impact other things. Some level of depression, more severe for some than others. That can then impact our dietary habits, our physical exercise habits, every aspect of our life. And that's why, just like that study showed earlier, that's when we start to lose that sense of purpose, and it really has a detrimental effect on our health. Social connectedness, it's not just about having people around. It's about meaningful interactions on a regular, perhaps daily basis. Meaningful social interactions. And lastly, safety and security. We all want this. As you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right there at the bottom, security, safety, those things, that all has to be in place before the rest of it really matters as much. So we want a place that's safe, that's secure, where we feel maybe it's even financial security, maybe it's healthcare security, knowing that the care you need is available if you need it. But when you think about all these things that I'm showing you here, there's a couple of things I'll mention about it. Number one, when we think about peace of mind, I mentioned peace of mind earlier. In theory, if you are planning properly, again, which I know you all are already doing because you're here, but if you are planning, then in theory that should decrease or perhaps even avoid some of these concerns. If through planning you can minimize these concerns, that should increase your peace of mind. That's really what planning is all about, right? Is increasing peace of mind. So how do we plan to minimize the effects of these things in your life? That's what we're really talking about. But here's the bigger point to that. Where you live today and throughout your retirement years affects almost every one of these. In other words, where you live is a very important part of that plan. Every one of these, where you live, the environment in which you live could shape what these situations look like potentially. All right, with that being said, let's transition now and talk about what are all the different options that are out there. Now, before I put the rest of this chart up, I want to talk about what's here on the bottom. So, On the far left side right here, it says no help needed, no assistance needed, and in parentheses it says independent. Okay? So this is what we would call, those who can live independently without any need for assistance on a daily basis, maybe still very active and social in some cases, and so forth. On the other side, we have the complete opposite. And that says 24-hour care, and in parentheses it says dependent. So everything from totally independent or mostly independent to totally or mostly dependent, 24-hour care, nursing care, those kind of things. And then in the middle, we have sort of in between, assisted living, personal care services, things of that nature. Memory care would fall somewhere along that continuum depending on the need. So this is the full, what's typically called continuum of care. Everything from independent to dependent and in between. So, with that in mind, let's talk about all the options that are out there. The first one, of course, is your home. I talked about that a minute ago. Many of you, some of you that are here may still live in the same home you've lived in for years and years. It's comfortable, it's familiar, emotional connections. You want to live there because you just don't want to deal with all your stuff, like I said, and making the move and all that. I understand. But I will tell you, and I'm not here to sell you all on anything, believe me. I want you to think about things. But I will tell you, you all have probably observed this some, staying in your home, I would say is easier in theory than in practice. It probably requires a lot more planning just to stay home than any of these other options I'm going to talk about. Because there's so many scenarios and unknowns that could take place, some over time and gradually, some suddenly and unexpectedly, which makes it harder to plan for. But that's one option, of course, is to stay in your home. And that also goes back to the circumstances that I talked about earlier too, and all that, which is different for all of them. The next one is what generally is referred to as an active adult community. There's a lot of terminology out there when it comes to these different choices. Active adult, independent living, senior living, active independent senior, on and on. And that's confusing. But for the sake of this chart, let's call it an active adult community. This is like a Del Webb type community. It's a planned development for people 55 and older. It's a neighborhood for people 55 and older. Maybe there's a golf course, you hear like a golf community, retirement golf community, those kind of things. It's on this left side, right? It focuses on the left side because the community, this type of community doesn't provide care. There's no health care center or assisted living. It's a home you buy within a 55 and older community. So in many ways, it's still like the first one. It's just in a 55 and older community. The next one is very similar to that. The difference is that this is apartments and not a home that you live in. So these are active adult apartments, sometimes called senior apartments. It's just an apartment for people 55 and older. Quite often, one of the distinguishing factors about this one is that there's not even a dining area. There's no meal plan or dining facility on site. It quite literally is it's apartments for people 55 and older. The next one looks a little bit like that one, but it does extend a little further out. This is often called independent living, rental retirement communities, independent with services. Again, tons of terminology. Part of why I put this on the chart is you don't even need to think so much about the terminology or what they call it, as long as you just understand kind of where they line up on this, right? So with this one, the way this community works is, number one, it does have, unlike the previous one, central dining facilities, meal plan, bistros, whatever they have, but there's dining, and they do provide some assistance. You'll see it stretches out a little further, usually lower level assisted living, and maybe some memory care, potentially. But higher level needs, 24-hour care, higher acuity type of needs, with this you would have to move again. Okay? So they can provide care up to a point. So independent plus, independent with services, this is generally what we're talking about. And the reason it gets blurry right here, if you can see that, is because the extent to which that where they fall within this. Some communities provide a little more than others in terms of care and support. But again, no 24-hour care, no nursing care, rehab care, anything like that. The next two I'm going to put up together. These both are focus on the right side of the chart. This was assisted living and a nursing home, right? So residents in these communities are receiving some amount of care. So let's just call these freestanding or standalone assisted living or standalone nursing facilities. Residents are receiving some level of care. So they're not on the independent side. And then lastly, we have a CCRC. Katie mentioned that when she was up here, that the Admiral is considered, or it falls in this category, a continuing care retirement community, sometimes referred to as a life plan community. But a CCRC, you'll notice, expands across that full continuum. Everything from independent living to assisted living to 24-hour care, rehab, all that in one community. So in essence, a CCRC is some combination of these previous ones that I've gone through with you. So when you think about the choices that are out there, pretty much they all fall on this chart somewhere. Now, there is one other one actually that's not on here that may be a possibility for some of you. I don't know. No. No. Hey, maybe it's the kids moving back in with you No, I put this up here jokingly, part jokingly, because it is funny. I love to see the reaction it gets. And the picture. I mean, one time somebody said, well, she looks happy, but he doesn't. So, but the other reason I put this up here is because I do think, there was a time, as you all know, in our country where it wasn't that uncommon for multiple generations to live together. Particularly when we were more of an agricultural society, before the Industrial Revolution and all, that's kind of the way. In fact, up to that point, that's pretty much how it had been. For a couple hundred years or more, that families all just lived together. And it's still like that in rural parts of our country, and even in urban parts, but a lot in rural areas where you'll have, grandparents and then the adult parents and the children, grandchildren there, and it works pretty well a lot of times. It used to, right? It used to work quite well. They'd work on the farm together, share meals together, help out where needed, and all that. But a lot has changed since then. We have really spread ourselves out, first of all, over the last 100 years, let's say. Living in all parts, the families are spread out all over the place, working in different parts of the world, many times, different parts of this country. We're living longer. On average, the trend at least is longer, the long-term trend. But with that, we also have more chronic health conditions. Living longer, but not often as high a quality life. So we have challenges that we have to deal with that, frankly, weren't there years and years and years ago. We have more solo agers, as they're calling them now, than ever before, as a result of many different things. More people living alone through retirement. And so there's just all these different things that really, I think it creates sort of this gap. I call it a gap where I think all of you, all of us, everybody has to really think, like, how am I going to fill that gap? And what I'm really talking about is how am I going to map out my own plan to help minimize those concerns I showed earlier. Because probably now more than ever before, it's important to do that for yourself. To be empowered to plan for yourself. That's not to say you can plan for every scenario. We don't know everything that could occur, but you can educate yourself, think through the options, weigh all these things I'm talking about, and hopefully put in a plan that will help in the future. Okay, now I want to we're going to dig a little deeper now, okay? Some of you had some wine, I see, so you got to stay with me because we're going to get a little more detailed now. We're going to talk about CCRCs. So that last one that I mentioned, this one, The Admiral falls in this category. But the reason I want to focus on it really is because there is a little more complexity with this option. There's a little more, even within this category, there's different types of choices. So let's say there's subcategories even under this. And that's what I'm going to talk with you about. Because if you're doing any research online or gathering information from Katy or other communities like this, you're going to see some of what I'm getting ready to explain to you. Okay? So, let's talk in general about what a CCRC is. Number one, it's housing, floor plans, all the different options, hospitality services, amenities, and that continuum of care that I showed you, provided under one continuing care contract. Number two, that continuum of care is generally all available on site, on campus, as some people may say, which is a real benefit. Everything's kind of right there if you should need it. That's not always the case. Some CCRCs, the healthcare center may be off-site, but usually, as it is here, it's all in one place. Various types of contract models. This is what I said a moment ago. There's even some subcategories, so we'll touch on that. And then lastly, most CCRCs, particularly not-for-profits, provide some level of financial assistance for their residents if they should exhaust their assets due to no fault of their own. So if somebody lives longer than average or needs more care than average and they end up exhausting their assets, whatever the case may be, many CCRCs will keep them there with financial support so they don't have to leave. And that's unique because every other option I showed you does not do that. So those are some of the, I guess, distinguishing factors about a CCRC, just at a high level. Okay, now with that being said, let's dig into how they work. If you're researching CCRCs, you're going to find that most of them require an entry fee. And that goes back to a time about 120 years ago when it was the way it worked back then, just to try to keep this simple, was that it was very charitable in the sense that oftentimes it was a widow of, say, a church or some nonprofit organization, and perhaps that widow had lost a spouse at war or something like that. And the organization would say, we're going to provide housing and health care for you for the rest of your life. Essentially, they provide that continuum of care that I talked about. But the way it worked back then was that person would have to assign all of their assets over to that church. So whatever assets they had, and sometimes they didn't have much in assets. That's where the charitable piece came in. But whatever they had, they would assign it to the church would look after them, and that's just the way it worked. Over time, as people's levels of wealth grew and people were living longer and many other things, that model just didn't work very well. Not for the industry or for the person. So today, where that has evolved into is an entry fee model. So you no longer have to assign all of your money over to the organization, but there's an entry fee. Anything above that, you keep, right? But there is an entry fee. And so I'll touch a little bit more on that as we go. But just with that in mind, you'll find that many communities have an option that works like this. When you move in, you'll pay the entry fee. I don't have a dollar amount on here because that could be different from one community to the next, based on the size of the residence, whether it's 1 bedroom or 3 bedroom or all those kind of things. But whatever it is, you'll pay that entry fee. And with this particular option, kind of this, let's just say this basic or traditional option, that entry fee is refundable usually on a declining basis over the first few years. So it may look like this. This is just a generalization, okay? This is conceptual. But with this example, that entry fee is refundable 75% in year 2, 50% year 3, 25% year 4, and then there's no more refund. So if that person were to move out, or in the event of death, wherever they fall on that, that's what they or their heirs would receive. That's a declining balance entry fee contract. So many CCRCs offer this choice. Now, they also offer, you'll find, other choices. You may find one that looks like this. All other things equal, okay, everything else being the same, you would pay more for this one. Your entry fee would be higher. However, with this one, this is called a 50% refundable contract. So with this one, it declines, but never below 50%. So in other words, no matter how long you're there, 50% of that entry fee is refundable to you or your heirs. Okay? So if somebody says we have a 50% refundable contract, this is in essence what they're talking about. There can be slight variations. Again, this is just conceptual, but it gives you an idea of how these things work. And you might even find one like this. But with this one, it never goes below 90%. So if somebody says we have a 90% refundable, that's what it is. Your entry fee your refund is 90% of what you paid all the way throughout. So these are just 3 examples. You might find there might be somebody might offer a 75% or an 80%, whatever the case may be. But this is generally how those work. You can kind of see the trade-offs there, okay? So that's the entry fee piece. Now, let's talk about what happens on a monthly basis. Okay, on your month-to-month, because there's also a monthly service fee for all the resources and services that you use on a day-to-day basis. So how does that work? Particularly if you say you need care later. What happens to your monthly fee? That's really what we're talking about now. So, some CCRCs offer this contract. This is called a fee-for-service contract. Again, you don't have to get too caught up in the terminology because there's so much of it, but fee-for-service, or type C as they're often called. But the way this works is you'll pay your monthly fee when you move in. Again, that can be different depending on the community, the size of the unit, and so forth, and the services and what's included, all of that. But whatever it is, you'll pay that monthly fee. But let's say later on you need assisted living within that community, or you need skilled nursing care along that. I mentioned all that's available, right, within the community. So with this model, as you need those services, you'll pay more for those services at that time. And we all know what nursing care can cost. It ain't cheap, right? So with this one, you pay more as you go. You pay for the care as you need it at whatever the market rate is for that care. So if you end up needing a lot of care or an extended stay in care, the cost can add up. So with this one, you pay as you go, but you don't know how much you'll need. So you kind of have unlimited exposure from that standpoint in terms of your cost. The next one works like this. And I'm going to do kind of a comparison here. This one is called Lifecare. If a community says we offer Lifecare, and the admirable is admirable too. Right? The admiral, Katie mentioned earlier, offers Lifecare. So what's that mean? Well, with Lifecare, all other things being equal, you'll probably pay a little more on the front end. Maybe a little higher entry fee, maybe a little higher monthly fee, maybe a blend between the two. But the trade-off is that if you ever need care, you don't pay more for that care. So think of it this way, no matter where you are within that community, your monthly rate is your monthly rate. So for people that like predictability, if you like to know, here's sort of what my monthly cost is going to be no matter where I am within that community, it kind of makes it easier to plan. Like you think if you were working with an advisor, you're kind of projecting out different scenarios, you just plug a number in, right? Because no matter where you are, it doesn't change. So that's that predictability. Now that's not to say there can't be inflationary increases. That's true of all of the options that I showed you. But the point is you won't pay more for care if you need it. Okay? So the care is included, in other words. So that's Lifecare. There are some that are a blend of those, and some, I won't spend a ton of time on this, but with this other option, let's just say you'll pay more if you need care, but there will be a bit of a discount on it. Okay? It might say you get X number of days in our healthcare facility at no extra cost, and then after that you start paying the full rate, something like that, okay? So that's usually called a modified contract. And then I'm going to show you this last one only for one reason. This is a rental. Remember I said most CCRCs require an entry fee. Most of them, not all of them. And you may say, well, that's interesting. Why doesn't that have an entry fee? Well, there's some differences. If you find a true CCRC that's purely rental, there's some differences that I won't get into. There's some trade-offs there. But the other thing I'll tell you is that if there's no entry fee, you're going to pay more, quite a bit more, all other things equal. Again, that's an important statement. You're going to pay a lot more right out of the gate. We actually have a couple of rental CCRCs where I live in North Carolina, and their monthly rates are substantially higher than the entry fee communities. And why? Well, the money's got to come from somewhere, right? And then you still end up paying the full cost of care if you need it. So these contracts, particularly Lifecare, that entry fee in many ways is helping offset that cost later, right? They operate very much, I would say, like many insurance companies. Now don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying it is an insurance company. I think I'm being videoed there, right? So I'm not saying it is an insurance company. I'm saying they operate a little bit like insurance companies. They take those entry fees, they set them aside in reserves, which helps offset the cost of care later for those residents. There's a whole actuarial component to this, okay? So anyway, you don't have that with the rentals, and it's just a little bit different. But that's how it all works. Okay, that's pretty much all the types of options that you'll find when you're looking at CCRCs. Okay, I think everybody's still with me. I see, that's good. That's good. All right, I'm going to talk for a minute. Let's see, how much time do we have? I'm going to, whatever, I'm going to cover this. I'm going to cover both of them. You get the bonus material today. That's a joke. All right, so sometimes people ask me, what if I have long-term care insurance? How does that work with all these things you just showed me, Brad? I mean, should I still have my long-term care insurance? Can I use my long-term care insurance at a CCRC? Well, first of all, yes. Generally speaking, you can use it. If you have long-term care insurance, I won't spend a ton of time on this because I know all of you don't, but if you do, you can usually use it. Now, you need to know what's in your policy. Don't wait until you need to use your policy to find out what's in your policy. So I would review that and find out if there's anything in there that might prevent you from using it at a community like the Admiral or any community for that matter. But generally you can use it. So if we go back to these options, fee for service, remember you pay as you go. If you have long-term care insurance, then that can work because it'll help offset some of that cost later. So that works quite well. You pay the full cost, but you have long-term care insurance to offset it. That's pretty straightforward. Let's look at the next one, Lifecare. Remember, you don't pay more as you go. Even if you go to assisted living or skilled nursing, your monthly rate's your monthly rate. So what if you have long-term care insurance with that? Sometimes people will say, isn't that, I'm kind of doubling up, right? Well, you kind of are on the front end, but your benefit doubles up too. Because your monthly rate hasn't gone up, but you still can use your long-term care insurance. So you might find that your net cost after that is extremely low. And then just the same thing across the board here. So this kind of gives you just a visual of how the long-term care insurance would apply to each of those. So that's another topic we could spend a lot of time on, but that gives you just an idea, as you're thinking about it. Now, the other thing is medical expense tax deduction. I get asked about this a lot. In fact, it used to come up during the Q&A, and so I just decided I'd put it in the presentation because it came up so much. But you may have heard that if you're at a community like the Admiral, a CCRC, that there is often a tax deduction, pretty sizable in some cases, available to the residents in that community. And so how does that work? Okay, well, let's first talk about how this deduction works in general for anyone. Okay, any of us today living at home, wherever, doesn't matter. you may qualify for a medical expense tax deduction. And some of you may already know how this works, but basically what you do is you add up all of your medical expenses for the year, including your premiums for health insurance, Medicare, and so forth. Add all that up, and if it exceeds 7.5% of your adjusted gross income, that difference can be deducted as a medical expense tax deduction. If you itemize on your taxes. If you take the standard deduction, which more people are now because it's higher than it used to be, you may not, then you wouldn't qualify. But if you itemize on your taxes, then you could take that deduction if you qualify. And if you have a year with really high medical expenses, it might make sense to itemize in that year. That's a conversation to have with your accountant. Okay, this is not tax advice, but I'm just explaining how that deduction works. So, how is it different if you're in a CCRC? What changes? Well, you're still going to add up your expenses, just like I said a moment ago. But now, you also can add to that additional expenses within the CCRC that you may have access. So, residents generally, every year will get a letter from probably somebody, the finance director or whoever within the community, and it will say X amount, 30%, 40% of your monthly fee qualifies for this deduction. And you can take that to your accountant. So they kind of give you the formula. You go to your accountant, whatever, and see if you can actually use that or not. But some portion of that monthly fee that you pay may be deductible. And I've seen it 20, 30, 40% before. So again, residents generally get a letter with kind of the formula for what that is, and you can take it to your accountant. Also, in year one, when you move in, there is a deduction on that entry fee as well. Pretty sizable deduction on the entry fee in that first year. So, you take all that and still compare it to 7.5% of your adjusted gross income. So, it's just you've got more you put in the bucket, so that deduction potential is much higher when you live in a CCRC than it was previously. And that's what your deduction is. Okay. So moving on from there, a few other things I want to touch on for you. Number one, what are some, we'll talk about entry fees and so forth. What about other entry requirements that you may have heard about? Well, if you're looking at a CCRC like the Admiral, they're going to look at two things generally. They're going to look at your health and they're going to look at your finances. And you may say, well, why is that? What do they want to know all that for? Well, again, CCRCs, particularly if they offer a Lifecare contract that I mentioned where your costs kind of stay the same, they want to know that residents are not at increased risk for needing health care in the immediate future or running out of money in the immediate future, because it's really tough to manage that model if that was the case. So they want to know that under typical and average circumstances that you're not in immediate need of help or exhausting your assets. And the financial part is important because remember I said they provide financial assistance if you exhaust your assets many times? Well, it's nice to have that safety net, but they want to make sure that they don't have to use that for everybody because then that's a financial risk to the community. So it's a little bit of an underwriting process, for your health and your finances. It kind of goes back to what I said earlier about being operated a little bit like many insurance companies. Now, it's not super invasive. Look, it's not, if you have bad knees or something, that's not what we're talking about. It's got to be a pretty severe, advanced stages of cancer, certainly memory, related issues, things of that nature. So they will look at that, and it's conceivable. I'm sure Katie can tell you she's had people that have waited and waited and then eventually could not get a contract because their health changed. It does happen. So something to be aware of. Okay, so what are the things to think about? Let's say you've gone through all of this, right? And you think, okay, the Admiral, CCRCs in general, what have you, looks like that might be something I'm interested in. What do I need to be doing? What do I need to ask about? What do I need to think about? Well, a lot could go into that, but here's just a few things. Number one, understand how the contract works. Everything I just went through, That's helpful, I hope, but it's, again, it's conceptual. So there can be nuances from one community to another. Those entry fee refunds and everything, you want to know how they work and stipulations around those and make sure your questions are answered. All of that goes into this piece. So just make sure you understand the details in the contract. The quality of care. We hope we won't need care. None of us really want that. Although I will say, the care, the different communities that I have the pleasure of visiting looks quite different than I remember when I used to go visit my great-grandmother in a nursing home. The innovation and some of the things that they're doing now are really, it's come a long way. But the quality of care, none of us necessarily want that. The reality is most of us will need it to some degree. So you want to make sure that it's high quality care, the kind of care you would expect to receive. So you want to do your research on that. Whatever that involves, make sure you feel good about the care that's being provided at that community. The management of the organization. The Admiral's been around a long time. How long did you say?
160 years.
160 years? That's really good. So there's, weathered a lot of storms. That's some really good management to see a community through all those years. But the management of the organization is very important. The general management of it, the financial management of it, the management team in general. Are they approachable? Are they likable? Are they friendly? Do they look after the residents? What's the vibe they give off? What's the culture? All of that's really, really important. Do residents feel like they're involved and have a voice in the community? My sense here is that so many residents were running everything today. And I love that. That tells me the residents are highly involved, and I love that. Which leads to the last one. Resident involvement. Going back to purpose I talked about earlier. Social engagement, purpose, learning new things, all the things on that survey. Is that community, how are they cultivating that within that community? What are the opportunities? How is that being done within that community? Some of this is subjective. It may just be talking to people. It may be visiting as much as possible. Observing, seeing what's going on, participating in different things. Whatever you can do to get a sense of that. So these are a few of the areas, that you can focus on as you go through and do your research. Now, here's the last thing I would say, and this may sound a little cliche, but I think it's really true. This decision, as you're thinking about it, this is more than just thinking about where to live. It's not just a place to live. I mean, we all want a really nice place to live, a place that feels comfortable, that feels like home, that the culture feels right to us and all those things. But it's so much more than just a place to live. It's really more about how to live. No matter what you ultimately choose. It's really a decision about how you want to live and what are the opportunities going to be for you. How are you going to best, what's the situation where you are going to thrive the most as an individual and with your health and your purpose and your social engagements. And I can tell you, because I have observed this many, many times, that at CCRCs in particular, there is sort of this group buy-in approach where the residents, because of the nature of this option, that you kind of have everything you need, that residents, they're not planning on leaving, in other words, right? And so you have this shared sort of, we're neighbors, this is our home, we're in this together. And what's nice about it is that if a resident does need care within that community, they have all their friends there that are right there with them to support them through that. I was speaking at a community a couple of weeks ago, and a lady stood up at the end and she told me, she said, she was a resident. She said, I've lived here for however many years it was, and she said, I fell, something like that, and I had to go into the healthcare center. And she said, I never felt alone because all of my friends were there. They would visit me, and when I came back, they were right there to welcome me. Now, that's quite different than some of these other options where something happens, particularly if it's suddenly, and now you have to go somewhere, not because you've chosen to, because you have to, and you don't know anybody there. You don't know the staff, you don't know the residents. That's why a lot of times the person's health goes down when that happens, because it's an emotional shock to the system on top of everything else that's going on in that moment. So as I said earlier, I'm not trying to convince you one way or the other. I'm just sharing with you things I have heard and observed that hopefully will help inform your decision. There's no perfect decision. There's trade-offs to everything. There are pros and cons to everything. And so I encourage people, don't try to find the perfect choice. You're trying to find the one that's closest to perfect, based on everything that's important to you and the things we've gone through today. So I think that's the way to look at it. And again, I thank you all for the chance to be here. I'm going to wrap up. I think you want to do a few questions if we have time. But thank you all. Hope you learned something that you can help.